Someone asked me, "Are you allowed to sit on a table?" I heard that there's parts of Jewish religion say I'm not allowed to sit on the table, and that's sort of an idea because the table is like the altar, and I can't sit on the altar. Yes, of course, we can't sit anywhere in the base of Mikdash actually. So what does it mean? Where does this come from? So there's an idea that the this is actually it says in the Navi that the God's altar is called God's table. It's the table that's before God. And Chazal continued with that imagery. They said the Kohanim, as though they received their share of the sacrificial food from God's table. God's table is the Mizbeach. Even though God actually has a table for bread, and by the way, who gets to eat all that bread that's on God's table? The Kohanim. God actually has a literal table, like a shelf, but he calls it a table, and he also has a Mizbeach, which is also his table. Okay, so they eat from there. So the shulchan is like a table, but does that mean every table is a mizbeach? Sorry, the shulchan is like a mizbeach. Okay, say it better. Okay, the mizbeach is God's table. A mizbeach, where we give offerings to God, is a table before God. But does that mean reverse that every single table is a mizbeach? That doesn't really make much sense. Okay, they didn't call it the table of mizbeach. Okay, but Rashi explains, the Gemara there in Chagiga, is saying that, well, a person can do mitzvahs, like bringing in guests, feeding the needy with his table, so it atones for him. Okay? That's what they're talking about. One can basically perform commandments and acts of kindness with his table. What does here say here? Also, a person who spends time at his table also can merit long life. Devarim elu v'heim le'mor mizbeach, that which is said about the altar. Shu nivra la'arichid yamav shel adam. Okay, the table makes a person's life extended, just like the mizbeach. The mizbeach offers atonement for a person. Okay, fine. And the Tosfos and Chagiga also explain there that shulchan adam mechaper lav shegadol koach haligima. Okay, the power of legima, that's like eating and drinking, swallowing, okay, has a power to extend a person's life. So there you go. If you eat properly, it extends your life. Much more basic idea. Now, the sages never told us, and therefore you have to treat your table a certain way. You're not going to find in the Rambam the extension of this midrashic idea that a table has certain aspects like a mizbeach, because God's mizbeach is a table, and if you use your table properly, you can merit a long life. So then we find that there's a minhag. They bring over here, the Ramah says, you should put salt on your table at all times, because the mizbeach, everything that goes on the mizbeach should have salt. And you should cover the knives during Birkas Hamazon, because you're not supposed to wave metal, iron against the mizbeach. It means you're not allowed to hew the stones in the mizbeach. Okay. The Vilna Gaon mentions that that's how people felt. And you're supposed to use whole bread. But then again, you're supposed to say a bracha on whole bread and on full cups, because the mizbeach is made out of whole stones, uncut stones. And then they say over here, you're not allowed to stand or sit on the mizbeach, on the table, because it's like a mizbeach. But here's the clinching line. Can't find such a source for this. Okay? They never said. This is basically Jewish folk practice. All these up until this point, by the way, are all relatively new ideas. The table is like a mizbeach, so do this. The table is like a mizbeach, so do that. For the students out there, I'd like to call this a halachic accretion. First, you start with the mashal. You compare something to another. There's a mashal. Your table is like a mizbeach because mizbeach is like a table. Okay, so to what extent do we take that mashal? Well, you should have salt. You should not sit on it. You should show it respect, etc. Now, here's the problem. How far can we, therefore, take this mashal? Okay? I'll ask you, for example, maybe you should only have Kohanim put stuff on your table for you. Why? Because your table is like a mizbeach, and a mizbeach, only qualified Kohanim can offer sacrifice. Okay? Let's see another example. Okay? Well, why stop there? Basically, maybe we should have a candle burning, like an Eish Tamid. Okay? For example, on the Mizbeach, there's always wood burning. Okay? You have to keep the wood burning on the Mizbeach Just like there's a blessing, you could have the candle of, at least the Western candle of the menorah is always burning in the mikdash. So too, you should always have a fire burning. We saw that mitzvah, and therefore you should have a candle always burning on your temple. Or if you have leftover food, just like anything left over from the Mizbeach is burned overnight, so too you should burn everything. Or, like I said, only allow Kohanim at your table. You understand that? Maybe I don't want to open up my mouth too much, because if I make these ideas, I tell them, look, table's like a Mizbeach, so maybe you should go all the way with it, because some crazies might get an idea. So maybe you shouldn't. I'm just trying to say that not everything that people have come up with is necessarily halachic, and perhaps it's time to just take a break and say, I understand the idea that I could do mitzvahs with my table, but it doesn't mean I have to treat it 100% like a mizbeach. Or maybe you should build your table, let's say another crazy idea. Instead of making your table out of wood or some combination of plastics and metal, you have to make your mizbeach entirely out of whole stones or earth. Why? Because shulchan doma mizbeach. That's a ridiculous idea. And horrifies to find out that maybe one day people actually do such a thing. So there we go. We have accretion based on mashal. Same thing with the whole idea of Vayikhulu. Tomorrow night is Shabbos, and the Gemara talks about how, say, if you recite the passage Vayikhulu, the end of the first chapter of Genesis about the Sabbath day, God finished His work there on the seventh day and sanctified it. It became the Sabbath. Okay, we recite that. If you are, let's say, using your regular, proper Art Scroll Siddur, you'll find it 3 times Friday night, once in your Shmon Esrei, and once before the Bracha Me'in Shalosh. That's the sort of quasi Chazaras Hashatz that's in there before the Kaddish, after Shmon Esrei, unique to Friday nights, and once again at Kiddush. If you look, by the way, Maimonides, in his version of the Siddur, doesn't have Vayikhulu in the Amida. He just has one verse there, and just the last verse. And also, he has no Vayikhulu before Bracha Mein Sheva. It just says, the Chazan says this Bracha, no Vayikhulu before that. Although Rav Amram Gaon did have it. He had people reciting Vayikhulu, and he preceded the Rambam before his Bracha Mein Shalosh. But he does mention a minute to say it before the first Kiddush, as the Rambam says it. Some people, before they say Kiddush on Friday night, they recite Vayikhulu. Okay, so what do we see from this? The sages never institute an obligation to say Vayikhulu. Okay, so how can it be covered by rules if it's not ordained by the sages? How could there be any rules about how to go about doing this? We see that, okay, it's part of the Shemon Esrei's text. There's a minute to say it, but you're not accomplishing anything. You're not fulfilling any obligation. The sages certainly didn't tell you have to do so. So whenever we have this, there's no rules. We have this a lot of times. Someone asked me, what are the rules about this? Just on Shabbos, someone told me, coming up, we have a special Shabbos. They got the number wrong. Once every 70 years, you take out 3 Sifrei Torah on Shabbos. It's not so true. It's actually many times over a course of a decade. What are the occasions usually talk about? Every Shmini Atzeres and Chutz La'aretz, nowadays in Eretz Yisrael. Also, take out 3 Sifrei Torah, and Shabbos Chanukah, which is Rosh Chodesh, and Shabbos Shkalim, and Shabbos HaChodesh that are also on Rosh Chodesh Adar, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, respectively. So you take out 3 Sifrei Torah. So that's quite often, not many times a year, but most years have such an occasion when you would do this. If not Hanukkah, then on Rosh Chodesh Adar or Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Check your calendars, and it's true. So he says there's a special piyut that they say. See, it's a piyut. I said, okay, you could say the piyut. You don't have to say the piyut. You could say the piyut every Shabbos. You could choose when to say the piyut. And the piyut is not universal. How do I know? Ashkenazim never even heard of this piyut. And he was shocked. He's like, what? Chazal didn't say to do this? I'm like, no, it's not Chazal. Otherwise, you would have had it. Chazal didn't even recognize the current system you have of reading the Torah. Even their annual cycle, which was mentioned in Bavli, wasn't exactly the kind you're doing. So why would they say this piyut and all that? So they don't understand. This is not governed by rules. It's just something they do. The Siddur printers. I wasn't at a Sephardic minyan this morning. I was diving into an Ashkenazic minyan. But yesterday morning, the third day of Hanukkah, they opened up the Aron, and the Sephardim were saying 8 verses having to do with light and candles. Okay, that's nice, but what's the point? I don't know. They do it. That's what they do. So you look at Orach Chaim, Mark 268, and you see this, that you say it with the congregation, okay? And it says that basically even an individual can say Vayikhulu on his own, okay? And the individual could say it. He's supposed to say it with the congregation, but he can say it on his own. Wait a minute. So who said to run after a partner so you can say it on your own? Okay. As Vilgoen points out, the Gemara said a Yachid could say it. Yet you have these people, they some or other, they said it during Shemona Esrei, they're going to say it during Kiddush, but in Shul, they missed it before the Bracha Mein Shalosh, so they run after someone else to say it with them. Okay, what's the point of doing that? Because it says that reciting this particular passage is like a testimony, testifying that God created the world. And testimony is done in pairs. Testimony by witnesses is done with pairs. So I want to find a pair with whom to do this. Like the Vilgoen said, the Gemara said you could do it on your own. That's what you learn from the Gemara. Why are you now doing it? Like, well, I could say it on my own. I don't need a tzibor. I should at least find someone else. Then you're not a yachid. Then you're shnayim. But more than that, why are you making this analogy? You're saying, well, it's like edus. So why just stop at getting someone else to say it? Why don't you say make it edus? Go all out. Why not have a beis din of 3 listening to you do it? Why not do it by day? Because beis dins are supposed to sit by day. And why not disqualify yourself if you're a gambler? Recently there was Halachic Accretion. All those Jews who are gambling, playing what's called fantasy sports. Ridiculous. Okay, it's a terrible thing. Are they qualified to testify? Because Sage said professional gamblers, they should not be testifying from the beis din. So if you're puzzled, or if you need to find a partner to say Vayikhulu, with whom to say Vayikhulu, so make sure it's not your father, or your brother, or your son. Okay? He's a karov. You can't testify with him. All these ideas are outlandish. But what's the point? If you start making a mashal with something and creating halacha, so how do you know where to stop? And that's why you should it's good enough to be like the Vilna Gaon. Okay? You say Vayikhulu, it's your partner in God's creation. Oh yes, it's testimony. Who said you have to say it with 2 people? The Tzibor says it sometimes. They have a minhag. But the Gemara said a yachid could say it, and yachid means 1 person. Okay? We should have the ability to understand what the Talmud is saying and when not to, let's say, just create a Jewish practice out of whole cloth just because we see there's some sort of comparison or analogy made. Okay, they have to be limited. Yeah, wish everybody Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom v'nitzachon, and don't forget, send your questions, comments, and we'll see you next time. Chodesh Tov.